Hello, and welcome everybody. We'll just let people come into the virtual room. Welcome to a very autumnal feeling day in Bristol. I don't know how it is where you are. I have got my cup of tea ready. Welcome to a session on everyday inclusivity. I am Roy Kareem. I'm going to be chairing this session, but in the spirit of inclusivity, hopefully you'll hear not too much from me and mostly from our amazing panelists and you, the audience, because what we would really like from this is your participation. I know often the sessions will say that, but we genuinely want it for this session because if we are actually holding a space of inclusivity, then what better way to actually demonstrate it in practice is to have a conversation with you and the audience. So I'm going to introduce myself. I'm going to introduce the shape of this session, and then I'm going to hand over to the panelists. So I am Roy Kareem. I am director of Bright Green Future, which is an environmental leadership program for 16 to 19-year-olds around the UK with an aim of dramatically increasing the diversity of the UK's environmental sector. I'm also a Black and Green ambassador for Bristol, and that is a program that is trying to elevate Black and Brown voices in this city into conversations around sustainability. If you'd like to know more about those programs, I will shamelessly self-promote and put links in the chat. Speaking of the chat, if you do have questions as they come up throughout the session, please do use the session chat to put your questions in there, and I'll keep an eye on that. Hopefully you know that there's the event chat, and then there's another tab which is the session chat. You want the session chat, and out of that you want the chat within the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that as we go. So I think really how I've sort of the session sits with me is that probably in previous Communicate conferences we talked about probably inclusivity, diversity, equality quite a lot in quite a theoretical sense, and I think what this session is really about sort of grounding it and seeing what it actually looks like in an organization. So what's the practical kind of day-to-day realities and what organizations doing to make it a reality, and that's how the conversation we kind of want to prompt is going to be as well, is what's happening in your organization, or what have your lived experiences been of that. So how the session's going to go is I'm about to shortly hand over to our three amazing panelists. They are going to talk for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to the room. And I've got some prompts and I've got some things I would like to kind of also share to sort of hopefully get the conversation going. But as I say, what we'd really like is you, the audience, to sort of begin to really feed in and make this a rich conversation. And also, if you do have direct questions for our panelists, we'll get to those as well, hopefully. And I'll do my best to sort of filter and navigate the chat as we go along. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists, who are all from natural England. And as I say, they're going to be really talking about how they've sort of tried to embed these notions of inclusivity within their organization, and how I think, and I hope this is speaking correctly, how it's, everything is still a work in progress. And it's really about the steps that we can take on that journey. So we have Tora Wortley, who's the Principal Advisor on Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. We have Cheryl Willis, who's the Principal Advisor for Connecting People with Nature program. And we also have Mikhail Chowdhury, who's the Equality, Diversity and Inclusivity Coordinator. So without further ado, can I pass over to our amazing panelists?
Hello, I think I'm up first. You should be able to see some slides on the screen in a minute. Ooh, thank you. Hello everyone, I'm Tora Wortley. As Roy said, I'm the EDI Principal Advisor in Natural England. For those of you who don't know, I thought I'd just actually say who Natural England are. We are part of the DEFRA group, and we are the government's advisor on the natural environment with over 500 statutory duties. So we have a really wide ranging remit. So we are an arm's length body and we are part of the DEFRA group. So we are aligned to the DEFRA EDI strategy, which was launched last summer. It's a new 4-year strategy. Whilst the strategy is comprehensive and encompasses all areas of inclusion, it does identify a small number of specific priorities for greater focus in order to improve outcomes in these areas where evidence from both data and staff views suggests we most need to deliver improvement. So these are Black, Asian and ethnic minority employees, disabled employees, and a cross-cutting priority on respect at work. Prioritising these areas is not to the exclusion of other areas such as social mobility or LGBT+, for example, and the need for, indeed, the new EDI action plan here at Natural England is cross-cutting, I can never say that properly, cross-cutting across all protected characteristics. The 4 priorities within the new Natural England EDI action plan include recruitment and diversity. As is common across the environment sector, Natural England doesn't have good representation, particularly BAME, which is at 2.5%. Increasing the diversity of the organisation starts really with recruitment. So we have begun and will continue to evaluate our recruitment campaigns and critically review our recruitment practices and the routes by which we bring people into the organisation. Line manager training has also been identified by both staff and line managers themselves as the need to properly support line managers to support their staff. Disability, with a focus on hidden disability and the responsibilities under the Equality Act, is the top priority, along with let's talk about race workshops, having difficult conversations, particularly around more sensitive topics and subjects, and inclusion. Mikhail will talk to you in more depth a bit later about listening circles, as the Race and Ethnicity Network have already run a few. But we're now planning on running listening circles across all protected characteristics and staff networks. These are 90-minute or roughly 90-minute sessions that provide a safe and confidential space for colleagues to share lived experience. The ones that we're going to be running shortly will be facilitated and evaluated by an external provider and will provide us with an evidence bank of qualitative data, lived experience that we can use to inform future actions and really kind of target and focus action where it's needed. And then finally, but by no means least, this one might seem a bit more boring, but data is a priority area for us this year. Access to really good data is absolutely essential to being able to confidently monitor and evaluate progress against CDI objectives and benchmark ourselves accordingly. We do have access to some really good data at Natural England, but there is more that we need, and we need to be able to present it visually in a way that's useful and accurate. A new data analyst team, which sits within the DEFRA EDI HR team, will be looking at this for us. So hopefully we'll be able to make progress on that. So that's a really quick run through of where we're going to be focusing over the next 12 months in Natural England. I want to now talk to you quickly about staff networks, as it feels important to mention these in a session about everyday inclusion. So we have 12 staff networks here at Natural England. They represent nearly all of the protected characteristics and a few other areas such as pregnancy and parenting, respect at work, social mobility, carers, and mental health. Some of the networks are really well established, while others are very new. But the things that they all share is that they help support an inclusive culture within Natural England by providing a space for all staff to access information, support and share experiences with others in a similar position. By their very nature, they represent the diverse views that we have here in the organisation and provide a platform for those voices to be heard. Since the start of the pandemic, they've been really instrumental in supporting staff and equality impact assessing decisions made, particularly around the move to home working, which was obviously quite rapid, and now the more gradual return to offices. They speak truth to power and hold the organisation to account on its EDI agenda, but we do, however, know that we need to do more to support them and grow our networks, which rely heavily on the goodwill of members. Mikhail will shortly be working on a network resilience plan and looking at ways that we can support the networks to really thrive. And finally, I just wanted to mention our values here at Natural England. A new set of values were launched at the beginning of last year through a consultation with staff. And we now have 4 values. We are ambitious, we act with integrity, we are collaborative, and we are inclusive, which is the one to focus on today. Not only does it define what we mean by being inclusive as an organisation, but it also gives staff a framework by which they can assess their own inclusion journey. Performance conversations now include how staff are contributing to and living the Natural England values, which is helping bring inclusion to the fore and is making the conversation around inclusion much more mainstream. So I'll now pass over to Cheryl, who is going to talk to you all about our fabulous new inclusion toolkit. Thank you.
Thanks, Tora. So as Tora said, I sit in our Connecting People with Nature programme, and I lead on our work on social inclusion and the natural environment. So as Tora said, inclusion is one of our core organisational values, and we wanted to think about how we could really operationalise that value in all of our work. So that's both internally and how we work with each other, but also externally and how we can reach out and communicate with and really hear diverse perspectives from different groups, because we are quite aware that quite often we speak to the same organisations, the same individuals, and we really want to get that much better at bringing in new and diverse perspectives and experiences into our conversations about nature's recovery. So we spoke to about 400 of our colleagues across the organisation and beyond, and we asked them what would be most useful for you in supporting you in becoming much more inclusive in your work. And people came up with a whole host of different ideas, including a language guide and hints and tips for reaching out to diverse communities. So we put all of these ideas into this toolkit, which really is it's a collection of guidance and support tools to really help colleagues. And it's designed to be interactive so that people can just kind of dip in and out of it. So you don't have to sit down and sort of learn the whole thing. There's quite a lot in there. And it was only launched a few weeks ago, but already we've had some fantastic feedback on it, saying how really useful it is already. But we are really keen to stress that it is a living document, and the plan is that it will evolve, and we will update it as new guidance becomes available, or colleagues and others point out different things that will be useful for them. And we've included already a selection of case studies from colleagues. So we're calling for more all the time, that we can update and refresh those and include those in the toolkit to inspire our colleagues to in different ways to be much more inclusive. So just to give you a flavour of what's included in the toolkit, so we have a bit of a sort of introduction, some definitions. What is inclusion and why is this important, and how does this help us to achieve our vision and our mission? And this is really important, because having the why, I think, in your head about why we're doing this, why this is such an important focus, is incredibly important to help keep us focused and targeted in our work. A guide to inclusive language, I'll talk about in just a moment, and ways of working with each other. And we have some kind of guidance around engaging with diverse communities and developing inclusive partnerships, because these are really core for us in achieving our overall aims. And as Tora said, we as a sector, we're not very diverse at all. We're very well aware of that, and we really do want to be much better at reaching out to diverse communities, and to be much more reflective of those communities ourselves that we work with and we serve. So we do have some inclusive recruitment hints and tips in there as well. And I should say, if anybody does have any other ideas about what else would be good to include here and develop, I'd be really delighted to hear your ideas. So just on the next slide, we've got the language guide. So language is incredibly powerful when it comes to creating an environment where everyone feels welcome and included. And this is one of the ideas that came from colleagues, as they felt that this would be really useful, both in our kind of general communications with each other and externally. And also a few colleagues were developing questionnaires for different projects, and they felt that, you know, some additional guidance on the most appropriate language to use would be really, really useful. But it's really important to say, of course, that language does evolve, and some of the terms, and we've used a variety of sources within this language guide, and we need to be mindful that not always those terms will be most appropriate or sit well with everybody. So, you know, we do have to have a little bit of sensitivity, of course, with language. But a line that I've included in here, which I do think is really important, is that we do need to make peace with the fact that we are all learning. We're, you know, very much at the early stages of our inclusion journey, and, you know, we will make mistakes, and that's okay. That shouldn't stop us from trying to be much more inclusive. And on the next slide, you'll see some examples of what's included in our ways of working section, which is full of really good practical ideas about how we can embed inclusion into our everyday work. So things that we can do, for example, to help colleagues feel more included, such as having inclusion as a sort of standing item on team agendas, for example. And in meetings, considering how different colleagues approach work, which may be different from how, you know, we might do that. So thinking about people may not want to speak up at meetings, and so routinely now, and I guess the pandemic and virtual ways of working has really spurred us on with this, but routinely now we use things like Jamboard and Miro so that people can contribute to those meetings in different ways, and you know, adding post-it notes rather than speaking up. Other things that we thought about was you know, having a good shared calendar of a whole variety of different events, so that you can know when your colleagues are celebrating or observing different different points in the year, and really be supportive of them, and being mindful, of course, that they may need a bit of support during certain times, such as Ramadan and fasting, for example. So there's a whole host of different things there that we've included, and also some practical tips about how we can include pronunciation of our name and gender pronouns, if that's important, in our signature strip. So I'll hand over to Mikhail now, who's going to talk to us about another really practical way that we're trying to embed inclusion in our work. Thank you.
Getting a sense that Mikhail might be having some internet connectivity issues. I'll just give him a second to see if that resolves itself. By the way, Kirsty just put in the chat, Cheryl, are you able to share a copy version of the Inclusivity Toolkit with people, or is it just an internal document at the moment?
Yeah, really good question. It is designed to be an internal document, so unfortunately a lot of the links that are embedded are from our intranet space, so they won't work externally. However, I can sort of share a sort of static version by all means, recognizing that, you know, it wasn't designed to be external, but that may be something that we want to think about in future.
Great. Mikhail, can I check in with you? Are you?
Yeah, I mean, can you guys hear me yet? Or
now I can hear you, so I'm going to hand over. Fab.
Sorry about that. Yeah, my internet is pants. Hello everyone. My name is Mikhail Chowdhury. I'm the EDI lead advisor, and I'm working on the Tora Wortley in the EDI team at Natural England. I'm going to talk today a little bit about listening circles. Participants' lived experiences. And they can provide a really powerful space for listening stations that draw upon participants, but they need to be carefully facilitated to ensure participants feel supported and psychologically safe, and they draw upon the principle of active listening. So what I've done is I've drawn upon some quotes which were anonymized to discuss inclusive ways of working and becoming anti-racist, and they form a really key part of our Let's Talk Race sessions, and colleagues have fed back that they provide a very powerful way to understand the issues that they face. So we plan to run a few more listening circles, as Tora said, to address really specific questions like, how do you feel your ethnicity shapes your experiences working here? And these will be run by an external agency who are experienced in this area. And this will take the kind of administrative and psychological burden off network members who volunteer their time. Next slide, please. Thank you. On the top first, so this person was actually a team leader, and despite being in a really senior position and working hard over many years, they were still made to feel out of place when they were introducing themselves. And of course, many people who reach positions of seniority have this imposter syndrome. That's fine, that's normal. But what's unacceptable is when these feelings come about as a result of someone's race or ethnicity. And because of their race and ethnicity, people have already relegated them to being of a lower grade in their minds. And when this person did reveal their seniority, the surprise reactions implied that they were undeserving of such a position. And these microaggressions, they do take their toll over time, and the trauma will accumulate and inevitably spill over. And we have an obligation at Natural England and beyond to prevent these microaggressions altogether. And I think this example really highlights how, when it comes to race and ethnicity, it doesn't matter how far someone goes or how hard they work, they can still be subject to people's unconscious biases. And it's our individual responsibility to confront and challenge our own biases. The second one, tokenism. So this person actually left after 6 months because they didn't feel as if they belonged. They were first generation migrants, and they joined Natural England with some preconceived ideas, and their experience was totally different. So for any person in any new organization, their first few weeks and months are crucial. New employees need to be made to feel welcome and safe, whatever their circumstances or background. And it's not just about having people that look like you or sound like you or come from similar backgrounds to you. There's so much more that we can do to make people feel welcome by going the extra mile. And this person had reached out to colleagues, but the fact that their managers weren't able to pick up on these anxieties really highlights the scale of the problem and the need for a bold EDI agenda that empowers people to speak out. The person's colleagues did anything wrong. They didn't do anything out of the ordinary, but they still felt out of place. And again, it just highlights the importance of trust between colleagues and line managers, and the importance of being proactive in welcoming people who come into the organization. And the last one, so this one hit close to home, as I've also experienced Islamophobia in the workplace. And unfortunately, Islamophobia has become so normalized in broader discourses that people feel that they can apply these hurtful stereotypes to their work colleagues. And as people leaders, there's an obligation not to be a bystander. You can help colleagues understand why these hurtful comments are not appropriate in any context, let alone at work. And this example really illustrates that colleagues may not understand what's appropriate and what's not. And it's important that managers and people leaders are equipped with this knowledge so they can then cascade it down to their teams and really set the tone. And this ought not to be a kind of prescriptive language guide, for example. It's more about increasing awareness and understanding about prejudices to combat them. And what I feel that the importance of these listening circles is that it gives us this qualitative data to kind of reach and demonstrates the urgency of implementing EDR practices to ensure that colleagues have adequate recourse when they feel aggrieved. So establishing networks about protected characteristics allows organizations to frame these difficult conversations in a respectful and productive way. And not addressing these issues risks alienating diverse colleagues, only being able to attract talent from very limited pools, and therefore reducing innovation as the breadth of ideas is reduced. So there is a corporate responsibility to address these, but we must also allow colleagues to feel empowered to undertake, their own research on the issues. And remember, no one expects you to know all the jargon and to know all the kind of complex socio-political theory. The most important thing is having an attitude to learn and to position yourself as an ally and to be emboldened to have the confidence to make mistakes.
Amazing. Thank you so much, panel. I know I've got a bunch of questions, but I'm trying to sit on them because I'd really like to open up to everyone in the virtual room. And I would like to do that in two ways, which is to ask our audience, what's happening in your organizations? Does what's happening within Natural England resonate with you? Does it seem kind of completely different? What's happening in terms of inclusivity where you work? Do you feel it's being addressed properly? Do you feel there's kind of a long way to go, or you're somewhere along the journey? So that's one of my questions. If you can put that in the chat of kind of like what's happening with you within your organization? And then maybe a bit more specifically, do you have any great examples of how, there was a bit of talk about how data is so important. So this collection of data, of whether that's qualitative through things like listening circles, or that's more quantitative stuff, which is through, potentially like staff surveys and things like that. Is data being used in an interesting way where you work, or do you have examples of that? And if you do, could you bring them into the chat? That would be amazing. And then also just a little bit, maybe be really curious to hear about also lived experiences of this. Mikhail was kind of beautifully talking about some of the work of the listening circles we're doing. And yeah, I'd be really curious if you're comfortable in sharing that, and obviously, share what feels appropriate. But in terms of inclusivity, where you've worked or where you previously worked, or however it's come up in your life, do you have examples both for the good and for the bad where it feels like it's actually been quite a significant issue? And Mikhail, I love what you talked about right at the end there of kind of when people first start work, of how like crucial that sort of time is in terms of, is this place for me? Do I feel welcome here? And just sort of that setting of culture. And if you don't, I think if organizations don't get that first kind of little bit right, even if things improve after that, I think it's quite a hard ship to right after that. And the other thing I would say is I also love the fact that in the listening circles, I think you were saying that you have outside people to come in and run those sessions so that the weight doesn't lie with the people who are already sort of in some ways sort of having to organize and sort of develop those, because I think that's often an issue of that kind of like you want to be involved in this, and so let's say you're in my case, let's say you're a brand man, so you want to like you want to run one of these things in an organization, and then suddenly like everything's on top of you in terms of like you have to be running it and organizing it and facilitating it and taking on everyone's things. So I love that you bring in other people to sort of to share that a little bit. So questions around all of that, and maybe to get us started a little bit, I've got some quotes that have been collected anonymously just from the sector, and I think I'd like to just, if it's okay with everyone, just to read a couple out, just to set a bit more of that context, building on what Mikhail just said, and then we'll come to the panel to sort of just gets their thoughts and kind of reactions as to kind of where the organization is at. So these are ones I just picked out. So these are sort of a personal resonance with me. So in my previous, quote begins now, in my previous workplace, I worked as an ecologist. I suffered from burnout from traveling and antisocial hours. I had no home or work-life balance, often working weekends, traveling up and down the country with no prospect of progressing. I felt stuck in a rut and felt the pressures of caring for relatives, the death of several family members, juggling moving homes and studying for a master's. I had to take time off with doctor's approval to help myself recharge. And when I returned to work, nothing had changed and no adaptations were made. I began to feel even more low and felt useless. I felt like I was being pushed out of my job because I couldn't meet the demands and hours of my role. At the time, it felt like I was screaming, but no one was listening. So that's one. I'm going to go for this one next. And obviously these come with taking inclusivity as wide as possible here. So this could be, this is things to do with gender and ethnicity and social mobility, and all of those areas are within what we're talking about. So next one, quote, the more senior I became in my role, the more often I would be shadowed by less senior colleagues. And I started to notice how if my colleague was male and the person who's speaking right now is female, then customers and clients would nearly always greet them first and direct any questions to them, even if I was leading the visit and had introduced myself first. I recall one visit where, despite me doing 100% of the talking, the customer directed all of their responses to my male colleague who was a trainee. This made me feel like I wasn't being taken seriously and my advice wasn't respected just because of my agenda. I'd advise people to try and be conscious of the assumptions they're making and the microaggressions that they may be giving and how these impact on others. And my final one, quote, I often feel frustrated, angry, depressed when people say that working class people don't care about the natural world. Not being involved in the same way is not the same as not caring. It gives the impression that the natural world is only good enough for the educated middle class, and that makes me feel angry and upset. when I was growing up, I needed the connection with space and the wild, even if it was the local park to survive. To make people feel more included, it would be helpful to try not to make generalizations about communities and what they care about, because they don't or can't always engage in the same way you do. We need to look at how we recruit people, so we're not exclusively looking for graduates and providing training opportunities. I'm just going to pick up some things in the chat, and then I'd just like to come back to the panel for responses. So Natasha, thank you. Bringing in speakers from outside our organisation is really valuable for Bristol Water, and having sessions run as virtual webinars has allowed lots more kind of staff to participate and dial in. I think, Cheryl, you were talking about how, in fact, remote working is sort of sometimes opened up different ways of communicating. Yes, okay, so Melissa, thank you. So supporting the Leonard Cheshire Change 100 programme, supporting young people with disabilities to start their careers and feel comfortable in the workplace with the right support. They are some of the best young people I've ever worked with. And finally, Kirsty at their organisation are in the process of developing an EDI policy in terms of the internal staff, but also taking into account the audience and how to broaden it. Their challenge is that they're in a rural setting in a quite affluent area with poor public transport and little diversity within our local community. So recruiting and engaging a more diverse staff team is a geographical challenge. Panel, can I just open it up? Whoever would like to respond, just respond. Yeah.
Can I just jump in and just on that invisible disability one thing that we do have at Natural England, which I think is really successful, and Tora might be able to give some more detail around this, is our workplace passports, which might be a good suggestion for other organisations. And this helps us just to, in a confidential setting, to be able to set down exactly what adjustments or requirements people might need. And that goes with you wherever you change, teams or roles. So you don't have to keep on explaining what is required. That is all sort of set out for you. So just another practical suggestion of something that could be useful for others.
Yeah, I was going to pick up on that one, Cheryl, as well, because it's been quite a hot topic at Natural England, and I think I mentioned that's why the training for line managers, particularly around disability and hidden disability, is a top priority, because it's something that we've been hearing a lot about. Line managers are often vilified in this, I think, but actually if we're not providing them with the, with the awareness, the information, the training that they need to, be able to properly have those conversations and support staff, then, we're not doing our job properly. So, and, that has a knock-on effect to the people involved. So, yeah, the workplace passports have been brilliant at helping to address that, because it kind of gives you a really structured way of having those conversations with your line manager and thinking through what adjustments you might need that might not be quite so obvious actually as well. And it's not a static document, it can be updated, and people should be having regular conversations with their line managers about it and whether it's still right for them and it's still working. So yeah, would really recommend that.
That's such a brilliant idea, and I confess, not a concept I'd come across until this session with you, and the kind of, I'd seen it referenced, but what a brilliant idea, and what a great way to almost give a permission structure for both sides to sort of talk about those things without having to, one individual to have to sort of build up and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. Mikhail, I was going to ask about the listening circles in particular. What's your sort of biggest takeaway from being involved with those, do you think?
I'd say with the listening circles, there's kind of two sides of utility to it. There's the one side for the organisation, for the HR people. We've now got some qualitative data to draw from. So when we're putting presentations together to petition senior stakeholders, we're no longer kind of pussyfooting around and saying, some people are feeling a bit aggrieved and there's a general sense of sadness. We can say, this is exactly this person's lived experience, and it's a complement to the quantitative data that we also have. But also I think there's the other side, which is the cathartic element to it. I think it's really an important and powerful thing that in a professional setting, you get to speak your piece. I don't know many opportunities that you'd get to do that, except maybe at a Christmas party when you're 4 or 5 martinis in. The fact that we can do this and have these candid and uncomfortable conversations, especially, you know, when it can be a bit more difficult. And one of the amazing things about having independent people to come in to facilitate them is that when you're speaking your piece and you're saying these things, your line manager isn't just across the room looking at you like, what the hell?
Oh, we may have lost you.
It's you a cathartic. Back?
Yeah, you're back. You're back. You're back.
Fab. Yeah. So it's just kind of, the kind of for the people who are sharing it, I think it's brilliant for them, but also for us who are trying to implement EDI changes, it's just a brilliant treasure trove of information.
Amazing.
That we wouldn't be able to obtain normally.
Thank you, Michaela.
Can I just jump in on that and just say that when I took on this role last year, and it was a new role for the organisation, it was also a new role for me within Natural England, and I think there'd been a lot of kind of guesswork, to be honest, that went on around what the organisation thought that it needed to do around EDI, and without actually talking to staff and finding out what people's lived experiences are and what the issues are, that we were only guessing at what needed to be done. So it's been a bit of a long time coming, I think, because of COVID got in the way and all of that. But yeah, I'm really confident. I think that when we run these and we get there's going to be a really lovely report written up for us with kind of recommendations that will sort of finally be in a place where we can really target those actions where they're needed.
Can I just add to that, Roy, as well? Just to say that we're supporting and have part funded together with the Wildlife and Countryside Link and the many member organisations underneath that, a state of sector review into ethnic diversity as well, to not simply rehearse the arguments around the lack of diversity. I think we're all convinced of that, but really to think about how we can build a roadmap for going forward, and for being much more inclusive as individual organisations and also as a sector. So that will be the first part of that report is going to be published fairly soon, and that will include a lot of the analysis of the research that was done through the tech sector, and the full report, including the roadmap, will be published early next year. So they will be publicly available. So I hope people will be able to dip into those and hopefully see some good ideas and practical steps that they can implement in their own organisations as well.
Amazing. I'm just going to flag a few things that have come up in the chat because it's kicking off in there, people. So people just, I think, really resonating with listening circles just as a tool of whatever size of organization they just kind of see, I think, the real sort of use of that. Jamie, thank you for your comment. Being one of the only Black people in my previous job, I felt the pressure to encourage change in the workplace. So set up a diversity working group. And sorry, there's more to your question, but I think many of us who come from different ethnic diversities would completely resonate when you kind of feel like it's, and this definitely happened last year. I think for a lot of people out of the Black Lives Movement, it's suddenly like you are the, it's essentialism, right? It's kind of like you are the voice of all ethnic diversity within an organization, and it suddenly falls on you to sort of take things forwards when it's an organizational shift that's required. Thank you for that, Jamie. Lisa saying just feels like there's a lack of generally proactive steps by workplaces to sort of tackle these things. Carrie talking about LGBTQ plus issues and how they're generally just underrepresented in the outdoor industry in particular. And to try and push it forward, how exhausting that can be. She has a specific question of, do you have any advice on how to take care of yourself and keep yourself motivated when working in such an environment? I'm just going to let that sit with you for a moment because I'm just going to read out a couple more, but if you'd like to respond to that. Nisha, hello Nisha. Listening circles also sound amazing. Being constantly underestimated and a frustration with the lack of listening was a big motivation for co-starting the Black Seeds Network. She personally needs a safe and supportive place and to challenge the narrative that Black and brown people are not already working and leading in sustainability. And then finally, Alice, which is more of a structural question, but she's saying she's coming from academia. which has lots of mental health issues, or she's saying that it has lots of mental health issues, and there's very little done to support on that. And but it's really kind of the structure of academia in terms of kind of short-term contracts and overwork and little support for families. And I guess what do you do when it's sort of, it seems so big and it seems so systemic rather than sort of just, just one organization to deal with? So I've thrown a lot at you, panelists. Is there anything that sort of bubbles up when sort of just reading those out, and whoever wants to take it on? Tora.
Yeah, I was just kind of going to reflect, kind of generally looking through the comments that, this work area is hard, it's challenging, and it can often feel, speaking personally, really, it can feel like you're not making any progress, or you're not making progress fast enough. Mikhail's nodding because I quite often, talk to him about this. But I think it is, a lot of the issues that we face, particularly in the environment sector, I think are really systemic, and they're really ingrained and they're really deep rooted. And whilst I think organisations like Natural England can try and kind of lead the way in changing some of this, actually it needs to be a sector-wide kind of effort. And it's not just up to individuals or organisations to do that on their own. So I think the more we can kind of join up and work together on some of this stuff, the better. So I guess it was just a reflection, really, to say it is difficult, and it does take time. But try and remember, if I look back over the last year of being in this role, it's easy to think, oh, not much has changed, but actually a lot has changed. We've really raised the profile of EDI work. We're talking about it a lot more. We've got a really solid action plan now. Things have probably taken longer than I wanted it to, but they are moving. And I think one of the big, there was some comments on here about people saying that they're kind of pushing it forward themselves, and that can be exhausting. And yeah, absolutely it is. And I think you really need to be mindful of looking after yourself in that, and not taking on the responsibility to change everything yourself, and to kind of, just to be mindful of that, really. But really whilst culture can change from the bottom up, more often it needs to be top down, unfortunately. And until you get the leadership team on board and really understanding what the issues are and what needs to happen, it is going to be a struggle. So for anyone kind of in that position, it's really about influencing up and trying to kind of make a difference at the top of the organisation and really get your voice heard.
Thank you, Tori.
And sorry, go on.
Mikhail.
Yeah, just really quickly on that point. With Jamie, I think it was, who said, once you're a black or brown person and you're kind of a representative for stuff, people come to you a lot, and it can be quite exhausting. It feels like you're talking for a lot of people, and everyone's different, and it's a lot of responsibility. I think when you're a black or brown person, or anyone from a protected characteristic, if you want to stand out, it does feel like you have to be that 5%, 10%, 20%. You've got to do that extra work, and it can be a bit exhausting. I think what Tora's point was key, though. You have to be petitioning those senior stakeholders, and what I've learned since being in Natural England is a lot of the time they care about the bottom line. So if you're going to do any kind of proposal, if you're going to sway the hearts and minds, you have to have the qualitative with the lived experience, but also put it as a business case, a business proposal. Say you're losing X amount of money over X amount of years, and here's how you can rectify that. So when you don't have representation, you have a lot of it is attrition rates. So you get really high turnover rates when employees are not satisfied in their jobs. So if the employee offer is not good, and you can say this team has been losing 5 or 10% of its workforce every year, if you implement these EDI, this EDI agenda, you can reduce that down, and you'll be saving X amount of money. It's the best thing, and if you have that marriage of qualitative with lived experience and quantitative, bottom line, you're going to be saving money. That's what I found to be the most effective way of getting through to people.
Amazing, thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah, I was just going to add the state of sector review that I mentioned previously does include, it sort of starts from that, top down, from a leadership perspectives, and it offers some really good advice there, exactly as Mikhail was saying, why this is such an important issue. But I was also going to add into that, on that point of kind of feeling isolated, feeling alone, feeling, overwhelmed and exhausted, I think creating allies in this space as something that we found is really, really powerful. And Tora mentioned our staff networks, and we are fortunate that we have developed this great range of staff networks that people can tap into and really talk to people who may not identify with that particular community, but certainly can act as allies for it. And that, I think, is really, really encouraging and really powerful. And also, of course, thinking about, somebody mentioned the lack of diversity in a geographic area. We must remember, of course, that whilst, we often think about ethnic diversity as a particular issue, which of course it is, diversity has many faces. And I think one of the really powerful messages of actually going through the process of creating the inclusion toolkit is that it sort of forced us to think about that in a really broad sense, and think about neurodiversity, for example, and bringing in people with different approaches, different ways of thinking is really important too.
Amazing. Panelists, we are right bang on our time. And I think with that, that ability to actually expand diversity is a beautiful way to finish it. It's not just one thing. It's diverse, right? That's what it is. So I would say thank you so much to our panelists, Cheryl Willis, Tora Whatley, Mikhail Chowdhury. Thank you to you, the audience. I hope it was useful and enriching for you. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your day at the conference. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.